Buonasera a tutti, io sono Johannes Aunmüller, uno dei curatori del Museo Egizio e oggi sera ho il piacere da introdurre il mio collega professore Dr. Richard Bussmann, ma lui terrà la sua conferenza in inglese, quindi anche io cambierò anche la lingua. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Dr. Richard Bussmann here in Turin for his lecture. Richard is professor of Egyptology at the University of Cologne since 2016. Before that, he was for around 6 years lecturer in Egyptology and Egyptian archaeology at University College London. Before, he also held a number of postdoctoral scholarships and was also assistant lecturer, which we in German translate as wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter at Free University of Berlin. And this is also the place where we met each other, because in the period when Richard was working on his master thesis and then also later on his PhD in Egyptology, I was probably a young student starting my studies in Berlin, and so I always looked up to Richard as, let's say, a grown, full-fledged student. Besides all these professional achievements, Richard is also the Secretary General of the International Association of Egyptologists, so he's also a leading figure of us all in the world of Egyptology. He's a full member of the German Archaeological Institute and also the president of the German Association of Egyptologists, so the Verband der Ägyptologie, a recently founded association for also promoting Egyptological research and exchange of ideas within German-speaking Egyptology. His main research interests are many, but one among is indeed also something that we are going to hear about tonight, which is the social archaeology of ancient Egypt. So it's about also anthropological and cultural historical perspectives on people and their lives, common people and not so common people. And so it's really the interest in society and culture as a whole, but also with a particular focus on the local level. And this is something that we also, I think, will hear about today in a wide view of integrating material, visual and written sources, so really including the whole breadth of evidence and data that we have at our disposal to study Pharaonic Egypt. He's also interested in urbanism in northeastern Africa, comparative approaches in early complex societies such as Pharaonic Egypt, and also one other research interest is archaeological theory, so also this is part of his studies. His main research projects at the moment are Zawyet Sultan, the archaeology and heritage in Middle Egypt, so something that is directly related also to his talk today, and also something with a very long German title, like Subaltern elites of the late Old Kingdom and the early First Intermediate period, so also about people in a specific localized context and their attachments and embeddedness in the social fabric of this region. His major publications is one amazing work on the provincial temples of Pharaonic Egypt from Dynasty 0 to Dynasty 11. So really a comprehensive monograph and overview about also the material culture and archaeology of these early temples. Then apart from this more archaeological approach, Richard has also written a book that is called Complete Middle Egyptian, a new method for understanding hieroglyphs. So a different way of teaching students and as a workbook in classes of Egyptian hieroglyphs to, let's say, go beyond the traditional approach in using a grammar to impart Egyptian language and more text-based and directly on using actual examples for learning hieroglyphs and understanding them. And then his latest work is that one, The Archaeology of Pharaonic Egypt, Society and Culture, 2700 to 1700 BC. So like a major work of the archaeology of the period of the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, so something that really touches and upon all the topics that he's going to present today, with a very much archaeology-informed focus, thinking again about people and societies and local zones of doing things and how they are done. So, but after this long introduction, it is now time for me to let Richard himself speak, and I'm very happy again for the fact that you're here, and I'm looking forward to hear something about the 99% life and death of commoners in ancient Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be back, actually, in Turin. I was here a couple of years ago and lecturing about the local temples, the provincial temples that Johannes mentioned in his kind introduction. And my interest in local context of ancient Egyptian society, in whatever we call the bottom of the society, has remained a focus in my research ever since. And this is also true for my current archaeological fieldwork project in Zawyet Sultan, which I would like to introduce today. The talk of my title, The 99% Life and Death of Commoners in Ancient Egypt, addresses something that we know in Egyptology already very well. Most socially sensitive Egyptologists are aware of what we call the elite bias in Egyptology. Elite bias means that there is an over-representation in the evidence that we're dealing with that we would consider to belong into the sphere of the elite, and also our interpretation of ancient Egypt rests on this material. So a corollary of this for the allegedly 99%, we are going to look into numbers later, is that they are held against the standard of the elite. And rather than asking what were these people doing, what was their, let's say, cultural orientation, how were they organized socially, they almost appear just as have-nots. They do not have burial goods. They do not have a big tomb. We do not have their tombs at all in some cases. So, and I'd like to develop a methodology which is also theoretically informed for approaching these 99%. So the basic question is, we all know that there is an elite bias in Egyptology, but how do we actually explore those other people in ancient Egypt? And what does it do to our interpretation? These are the questions I would like to address tonight and also discuss with you later after the presentation. I chose a title that is a bit, you might find this a little bit too politicized. The 99%, this was a slogan that was coined in the Wall Street protests in 2011. This is not the Wall Street here, what we see, but this is in a different city where this slogan has been copied. And basically here the claim was, you in the Wall Street, you are only 1%, we are the 99%, and you are ruling the country, we have nothing to say, what happens with our money? So it was a clearly political statement, certainly also not literally in terms of being 99%, but they are the felt 99% of the disempowered in US society. This was the background of the number. I wasn't entirely sure whether I should really choose this title because it might feel a little bit too politicized for ancient Egypt. We're used to talk about ancient Egypt as something that is very far away, nice to look at. There's also nothing against elite culture. Elite culture was highly complex, highly interesting. If you go here into the museum, you see a lot of elite culture, and it is absolutely exciting. I think we also need to consider the rest of the society. But then I thought, no, talking about these people is a political issue for various reasons. A, it's much harder to find funding for research based on tombs, settlements that don't look aesthetically very interesting, and that are also more difficult to find in the evidence. So it's easier to say, I excavate one large tomb, so you have a concession around the tomb. If you look at the non-elite population, it's usually more dispersed. It's a little bit more difficult to define where you start, where you end. And then also a big topic for everyone investigating the 99% is that also their representation in scholarship is much worse than the rest of the ancient society. Almost everyone interested not only in Egyptology but also in social anthropology, in history, in geography, interested in these kinds, in these segment of the population, is almost always also politically active. And then, of course, we may also raise the question of our political scene today. So in many countries, we see developments that we weren't quite anticipating 10 years ago, and I feel that there is a progression again towards an elite bias in our current politics in many countries. So I think there is something political about investigating the 99%. My talk is structured in a way that I start with a few comments on the 99%, quantifying society. I would then like to, and the pros and the cons and what we learn and what we don't learn from statistics. The second part is about my current fieldwork project, where the commoners are an important part of the excavation. The third part is, a little bit more cultural, theoretical, or it's, let's say these are reflections on the problems and potential of evidence that we have. There is rich evidence of common life in ancient Egypt, but most of the research is descriptive. So most of the evidence is described, but it is not used to advance social or cultural analysis of ancient Egypt. And I'd like to talk about this and then some final comments. So first of all, 99%, are we really talking about 99%? Of course, this is a symbolic number, but it is interesting to look at numbers, not least because the non-elite population is very often treated only in quantitative terms. So the behavior is quantified, so and so many tombs, they are buried with the head to the north, so and so many percentage to such and such and such and such, but very rarely individually or qualitatively. So quantifying society is an inherent part of investigating the non-elite population. Let's have a look at some very simple social pyramids. Here is one produced by my colleague Eva Christiana Köhler in 2008, and I suppose that many of you have seen such pyramids in one way or the other. This is how I learned about ancient Egypt when I went to school. Basically, what we learned was it's extremely hierarchical and it was despotic. And then came the Greeks and delivered us and brought freed us and brought democracy. So these pyramids are very compelling. They are also simple and they are even perhaps not wrong. What we see is at the top we have all sorts of kings and royal family, aristocracy, and then it goes down in the through society. Nothing in this pyramid is really is surprising. I think this is what we expect. On the left-hand side, Christiana Köhler has listed the kinds of tombs in the early dynastic Memphite area, so where later the pyramids were built. She has an excavation and she has investigated some of the tombs. So she equated those levels of society with the tombs that she found. On the right-hand side, residence means in what kinds of settlements would they have lived. None of these settlements has ever been investigated or has ever been found, so they're entirely elusive. An interesting aspect of this pyramid is the numbers here are fictional. So this is not at all an attempt to really talk about 99% or 70% or maybe just 20% at the bottom of the society. We really don't know. And we also learned from the data that we know quite a lot about the top of society, many different titles. People in ancient Egypt were eager to express status and identity, to make distinctions, whereas when we go down in the social hierarchy, suddenly people look more and more similar to each other than at the top. So this is certainly something that we can learn from this pyramid. Another example, now a little bit later, by Wolfram Grajecki, is another kind of pyramid. It's essentially the same. Again, on the left-hand side, we find the equation of segments of a society with specific types of tombs. We don't need to go here into the detail. And on the right-hand side, we see the evidence of the settlement of Amarna, the capital of Akhenaton. This pyramid works more or less the same. Apart from the outcast, let's put the outcasts here aside, it's an interesting idea. But what is interesting here is that the two tables describe the society in early dynastic Memphis, the previous slide, around 3000 BC, and this pyramid dates to around 1500, 1300 BC. Nothing has changed. The entire enormous transformations in this society go entirely unnoticed. So what I find interesting about these pyramids, they might reveal something about ancient Egyptian society. They inform us about the organization at the top specifically, but they also hide a lot of social reality and obliterate what also might be important to the ancient Egyptians. Status is the one thing. The other, and I believe this is even much more important, is social relationships. It was perhaps less important whether the society was unequal compared to whether people behaved to what they were expected in their social relationships. So all of this is not indicated in these social pyramids, and of course other aspects of identity such as gender, ethnicity, age. All of this is not represented in these pyramids. So while I find the pyramids interesting to some extent, I'm also a little bit worried how much they hide and how much they guide, mislead us for an investigation of ancient Egyptian society. When we address actual numbers, one of the preferred sites from the Pharaonic period is Amarna. On the right-hand side here you see a photo of one of the so-called villas of Amarna. Some of you might have visited the site already, and if you have ever seen one of those villas, I was a little bit shocked about the bad and poor quality of the mud bricks. It really doesn't look like a villa. It was rapidly built. On the left-hand side, you can see an analysis by Barry Kemp, or published by Barry Kemp, a series of estates planned by the state, and within them, these are these villas that you can see here. What wasn't planned in the city was all the mid-sized and smaller houses here in between that gradually grew into the settlement. And measuring the house sizes, this is the graph that Barry Kemp came up with. We see here that there are a range of really large estates and villas and a whole range of small and mid-sized houses. We can refer here to Christian Tietz's analysis of house size combined with the thickness of the walls. So his idea was that the thicker the wall, the greater the comfort within the house. A combination of these two factors, size and comfort, led him to this typology of houses, small houses, let's put it simple, mid-sized houses and large villas. And this is basically his analysis. So the villas make up around 12% or so. we could say the upper class and the middle class is about 1/3, and 2/3 of the population would live in rather small houses. So 99% certainly isn't quite the actual number, and it is possible to look at real numbers and not just to hypothesize about those numbers. Ian Shaw has conducted further analysis with these houses, and this is a slightly advanced modeling of the house sizes. What you see here is, again, a house size. So each rank corresponds to a certain house size. Basically, rank 1 to 10 means certain house sizes. And then he has looked at phenomena that he thought might be relevant for social distinction and social distinction. One is the number of magazines and granaries within the houses. And he found out that in the rank 1 to 6, there is a more or less gradual increase of granaries within the houses. And in the middle class and in the upper class, I use these words with several quotation marks, but to keep it simple, I call the middle and upper class. The statistics are not really conclusive. And the same is true for other aspects. For instance, the distance to the nearest next house. Again, in the lower classes, it's more or less predictable, less so in the middle and upper class. And the same is true for other parameters. These are just 4 out of 10 or so. What do we learn from these statistics? What I find interesting here is that the lower social classes behave in a rather predictable fashion. So we can more or less deduce that in those, in the lower status households, there was a certain way of aspiring to certain types of comfort in the house. In the middle and upper class, specifically in the upper class, the correlation doesn't quite exist, either because distinction was played out in a different way. Maybe you have lived close to your nearest neighbor, but you had your own pool, or you had your own chapel, for instance, that linked you to the king. So there are more qualitative means of distinction. And another purely statistical explanation would be that, of course, in the upper classes, statistically, the number falls below the statistically relevant number of examples. So simply, the statistics are not as stable as they are for the lower social classes. So working with these statistics comes with implications, how we read and interpret such data. Another implication here to keep in mind is that what is it exactly that is measured here? We are talking about houses. The implication is households. This is not about individuals. As we have seen on the social pyramids, this is a ranking of households. It's different for this type of analysis by Nicole Alexanian, who looked at Old Kingdom, 3rd millennium, a distribution of sizes of mastabas, the rectangular tombs, typical in provincial Egypt, and she measured the size that a tomb would occupy. And in the 4th dynasty, she observed that most of the tombs are fairly small-sized, up to 10 square meters. The way the data are arranged here is called a cumulative curve. It means that in each point, all previous points are included. So this is why this curve looks different from the previous model. And then again, we have here a rather few mid-sized tombs and then many large tombs and monumental tombs. So it appears that this society, this is the provincial society, not one community as in Amana. It's a different thing that is being measured here, a different segment of the society. We have many small and many large tombs and very little in between. This changes towards the late Old Kingdom, the 6th dynasty, where the majority of tombs falls into this mid-sized class of 10 to 100 square meters. So Nicole Alexanian concludes that we see here something like a rise of the middle class, the rise of independent craftsmen already in the Old Kingdom. The whole discussion of middle class is something that we know in Egyptology very well from the Middle Kingdom. So there's much discussion in the Middle Kingdom about the middle class, and Nicole Alexanian concludes that this might have already happened before. One of the strengths of quantitative analysis is to actually look at large numbers to stabilize the pattern and to look at diachronic change of the same sample. So this certainly is a strength. But of course now we have to be aware that these tombs, what exactly is measured here, it's tomb sizes. You could also measure, and others have done this, tomb equipment, how many pots per burial. You could measure the depth of the tomb shafts. You could measure the amount of stonework that has been employed in tombs. So you have to decide at some point, what do you think is socially significant? And Nicole Alexanian, I should say that those that conduct these analyses are very, very aware of these problems, so they are the most source-critical users of their own data. So I'm not blaming Nicole Alexanian, Ian Shaw, Barry Kemp for any shortcomings. It's just in the comparison of these various studies, it becomes visible that what the scope of those studies is. So here we're looking in the provincial society, and so in some of those tombs, it wasn't just one individual that was buried, but two individuals. So there's another difficulty here that one tomb doesn't equal one individual. This is not about households. If you compared households in the Old Kingdom, if we had so many settlements that we could do what Ian Shaw has done with Amarna, the graphs might look entirely different. So this is something that happened in social history. After a fascination with quantitative data in the 1950s, 1960s in the École des Annales, what social historians suddenly found out that they measured and quantified their societies, and the graphs didn't map on each other. So whatever you measured, a different social structure came out of those quantitative analyses. So that's why I believe that quantitative analysis is great for many reasons, but it also has severe shortcomings. And of course, asking what about the 99%, what about the commoners, what we learn here is they had very small tombs. This is basically the conclusion, which is not really quite what life and death of commoners was about. To counterbalance these rather abstract ways of representing ancient Egyptian society, I'd like to introduce some archaeological data. And I now come to the second part of my talk, and this is my current fieldwork project in Middle Egypt in Zawyet Sultan. On the map you can see where it is located, slightly south of the modern city of El Minya. This is the spatial relationship between the two. So this is the city, this is where we usually stay in New Minya, a rapidly growing, entirely new city, and this is where the archaeological site is located. Now zooming in on the archaeological site, we have here a northern part that has been excavated before, and a southern part here, late period and Greco-Roman remains that are hardly touched by any archaeologist. The most famous monument to guide you through the site is the remains of a small, a minor step pyramid of the early Old Kingdom. This is a structure for motion model here, seen from top, where you can see how the pyramid was built in these various layers, a layer technique. The second most prominent types of monuments at the site are rock tombs. And rock tombs are sensitive for our topic tonight. Here you can see a model made by Emanuele Taccola from the University of Pisa in 2019. The tomb is now destroyed almost entirely, but 150 years ago, Richard Lepsius visited the site and he copied the inscriptions and the decoration of the tomb. And this tomb was quite well preserved. We see, and you may have seen thousands of such images already here in various talks. We see here the tomb owner, who is called Khunes, who was a nomad, as a local leader. His title can be found here. He was also the overseer of the priests, presumably of the local temple of the god Horus of Hebenu, with his wife. And much discussion in Egyptology is about about the provincial elites and how they were the interface between central administration and local communities. But far less research has been conducted about the actual local communities. Who are all these individuals here? The family of this governor, but also the boatsmen, the administrators, and also on the next slide we have here fishermen. Well, they are fishing for a crocodile here. The degree of it's a little bit difficult to say whether this is a copy of mastaba tombs from the courtly cemeteries. So we believe that Khunes was sent as a central official here into provincial Egypt, and the reliefs are of very high quality. My very strong assumption is that it was a royal workshop that designed these images, and they probably were also familiar with the visual culture of the highest state officials. So this was copied in the tomb. These individuals may not have been real individuals living in Zawyet Sultan. It might just be a matter of the visual discourse, so copying prestigious imagery from the courtly cemeteries into the province. But very often what happens with such discourses, they can become a reality. So when Khunes arrived, maybe a local community started to interpret itself against the imagery in this tomb. So people became boatsmen for the local governor. So discourse and reality is related to each other in interesting ways. It's not just a depiction of reality, but I would also be careful to only believe that discourse is a self-referential practice, so just copying and pasting elite imagery without any recognition of realities. Now, zooming in on these individuals, Johannes Auenmüller has conducted a wonderful analysis of another tomb of the same, slightly earlier period, how low-status individuals are depicted. This includes, for instance, being naked, being dressed, wearing certain types of hairdress or wearing no hairdress, and. So there's a rather detailed iconography of how non-elite individuals, commoners, were depicted and perceived by the in-elite discourse. What we are interested in Zawyet Sultan is whether we have a chance to find those individuals in the cemetery of the Old Kingdom and early First Intermediate period. Where are those people? Who are they? Where are they? And for this purpose, we have started an excavation here of an area that hasn't been excavated before. This year we had a great chance, so surface finds indicated that there were tombs and shafts and pottery of the Old Kingdom. In this season, 2025, this spring, we had a chance to conduct a geophysical survey under the direction of Thomas Herbig. This is the part that we excavated that I'm going to show you, the upper trench, what I refer to the upper trench, the middle trench, and the lower trench. Now we understand a little bit better whether there are more burials coming forth, potentially. Unfortunately, these maps are not so easy to interpret. Yes, some structures emerge very nicely and clearly here from the magnetometry, so we can view with the magnetometer below the current surface all these structures that you can see here, these magazines, these what might have been either holes for trees, maybe here part of a temple structure, are not at all visible at the surface. So this is of course a great tool in archaeology, which is widely employed. In this area where we expect the cemetery to be, it was a little bit more difficult. Some of the anomalies where we thought this might be a tomb shaft filled with burned pottery, so this would appear as a black dot on the map, turned out to be rather recent ash deposits. So a fire was made 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and this is what we excavated. So it was not so straightforward, but still magnetometry will help us a lot in the future. What we did excavate here is now the upper trench. We started to expose a couple of shafts, and these 4 shafts presumably belong to one individual tomb, as we understand it now. So it's several shafts forming one tomb with multiple shafts, and I will show you the finding of these 2 tomb chambers. And this is the first one that we just saw on the left-hand side. Rather poor underground, I have to say. Those of you who have ever seen burial chambers of ancient Egypt, most of you will be used to the very nice and neat tomb chambers in Saqqara and Giza and what have you. These are really difficult and also difficult to excavate. These stones in a loose, what we call tafla, so muddish, soft material, keep falling out and down, which means you have to be very careful when you excavate this part here so that the stones don't collapse on the body. We see here a human individual in a decayed wooden coffin, and the coffin itself, we could reestablish the height, the original height of the coffin, and a lot of linen was used also for the body. This is not mummification, so the intestines weren't removed. But the body was wrapped in linen, and also different types of linen have been used. So we see here also several patterns and knots and so forth. So linen, it's interesting to see that with this material linen, different parts of the body have been emphasized. Some linen has been used for internal, I know the broad linen has been used for internal wrapping, and then an outer linen has been employed for the finer linen. It's interesting to see that in this segment of the society, linen has been used as a means of distinction, or at least as an interesting material. It wasn't just a function, wrapping, it was a value that was placed on linen. On the opposite, we also have a similar burial which looks like this, again in an individual in a decayed coffin, and this coffin still had an inscription, very poorly preserved, as you can see here. It's a line running along the side wall of the coffin, and this probably belongs to the name of the god Inpu Anubis. So here an offering formula at the beginning, and it's very typical in the late Old Kingdom to find Inpu being mentioned after the name of the owner. Moving on to a tomb, again in the upper trench, another tomb didn't have a burial chamber, but the individual was placed on the bottom of the shaft, and very beautifully next to the feet of the individual we found these faience beads, these blue beads, as they were originally strung. This is how they look like, material from this tomb. Again, when you excavate a tomb in Giza or Saqqara, this looks like rather shabby. But in Zawyet Sultan, when you only work in brown and gray material, decayed mud bricks, sand, and so forth, this blue faience material really sticks out. It really is shiny. Faience may not be very prestigious, but here I think the color was certainly an important aspect. It was not only about the fact that faience is fairly easy to produce, but it's about the color. And also, in this tomb, we found a range of amulets. So figurative amulets, very small in size. You can see that this is 1 centimeter here. This is a crocodile, a falcon, an ujat eye, a human being. This is a child here. So this is a material culture that we know very well of tombs of the late Old Kingdom and the First Intermediate period of this, from this period, and we are quite lucky to have found them after many, many years that no comparable material has been found, to have found such material in situ again in a tomb. So this is the upper trench, and we see here that these individuals were fairly rich. They had this shiny material, they had inscriptions on their coffins. We now move a little bit lower down the desert slope, so walking down from the desert escarpment. I show you 2 examples here of tombs. This is again a late Old Kingdom. This is the same period that we've just looked at, this ensemble here. And I will also show you tomb number 14. The main excavator here is my colleague, Dr. Bart van Teunen, who is also the main archaeologist in this project. He excavated tombs 8 and 20. Initially, we thought that these 2, this was one tomb with 2 different burials, a lower one and an upper one. The lower one turned out this year to belong to tomb number 20. So we only now discovered that this one belongs to a shaft next to the shaft that we excavated in 22. And these individuals are interesting, among others, because of the pottery. So we have quite a good sequence here of pots, and these date to the early to mid-First Intermediate period. So we are quite safe here, much better than in the upper part of the cemetery. We have better dates for this middle part of the cemetery. And this part of the cemetery, as you've seen here from the slide, the tombs here are much simpler. These might belong together, these 2 shafts here, but we don't have this multiple shaft mastabas that we saw at the upper part of the desert escarpment. And this part of the cemetery was also used in the Old Kingdom, and we were lucky to find a sealed burial chamber. So that has survived the past 4,500 years without having been touched. This is like if you win in a lottery, this is what happens in archaeology, and the tomb, in fact, delivered. So when we removed the wall, we found an intact burial here in the center, a pottery ensemble here in the front, and a range of stone vessels. And this is how the stone vessels look like. I was really so surprised when these stone vessels came out. I've never excavated this material. This is museum stuff. So things you would see here in the galleries. I've never excavated such outstanding and beautiful material and objects. So this individual clearly had access to workshops of the kings and the upper elite in the early Old Kingdom. So we're now in the 3rd or 4th dynasty. The burial looks very poor, but in fact it is very richly equipped, so we have to be careful to apply our expectations of what is a poor burial and what is a rich burial. Here is again a drawing of the situation and the stone vessels. And now moving down the slope, now we reach what I would call the commoners. And this is how this cemetery looks like. Very simple burials. This is what, maybe I should say maybe the most interesting or innovative part of our excavation, because many such cemeteries have not survived. and we are lucky that we found one. The individuals were placed either in pottery coffins, in wooden coffins. There seems to be a kind of superstructure, so a circle of stones and rubble was placed around the burial container to demarcate the place of the burial. This is a nice one. For many of them, this has disappeared, and we even don't know whether there has been a superstructure. So this is how these individuals look like. Again, we are here in the early Old Kingdom with our anthropologist, Dr. Afaf Wahba, and a former student from Egyptology in Cologne, Pierre Lorenz, here documenting the bones in situ in the field. And you can see here on the photos how simple the burials are. There's hardly any burial equipment, hardly any bead, hardly any, we found a few beads, faience beads, interesting. Hardly any pottery within the tombs. There's some pottery between the tombs, which gives us an indication for the date. But really, compared to what we've seen before, this shows how simple these burials really are. And of course, the human remains are exciting material to study the life of these individuals. Because they exhibit all sorts of degenerative diseases. In the vertebra, for instance, this belongs to the hip. This is the part of the thumb, a bone from the thumb. The bottom line of this evidence is that all of these individuals had a fairly tough life. So diet was not particularly good as far as we can tell from the visual inspection of the bones. We also had some cross-rays made with the on-site X-ray machine. Even across the social strata, the commoners and the slightly better off in the middle part of the cemetery are fairly similar, slight differences, but all of this is so far anecdotal. So we really need to go into the statistics to understand better whether we see here a pattern or an exception. So our working hypothesis now is for this side, where are we with the non-elite and the local elite? This is the picture of the early Old Kingdom, the social topography of the site. What we did in my lecture, we went from this part, the rock tombs, down the hill to the tombs of the commoners over here. This is approximately where the pyramid is located, further in the north. And we have the subsurface burials of the non-elite and the shaft tombs, the nice one with the stone vessels of the local elite of the early Old Kingdom. And in the late Old Kingdom, the picture is more complex. We have here the rock tombs of the Nomic and his family, what I call the dependent elite, the multiple shaft mastabas with the inscriptions, the middle class, the double mastaba with tomb 20 with the nice pottery that we've seen, and the non-elite segment of the population further down the hill. Here the date has still to be established for the late Old Kingdom. So there seems to be some late Old Kingdom evidence, we can't say yet exactly. And we can now try to map those individuals on the decoration within the tomb. This, of course, is entirely provisional. So if we compare the tomb types with the individuals depicted on the tomb walls, we find here the Nomic and his family, the wife and the kids. We have the extended household. This might include the administrators that we've seen on the rock tomb. The middle class, these might be the kinds of supervising individuals, supervising the boatmen, supervising agricultural activities, and then finally the fishermen. It's interesting to note that most of the individuals that we have found so far in the non-elite segment are women. and women are almost absent in the tomb decoration. So we see already the matching of one on the other is not so straightforward and not so simple. We understand how biased the tomb decoration really is. This is just the segment of the society that the Nomek, the local governor, was interested in. He was interested in public performance. He was interested in the work that was done for him. And this work was done by men, at least stereotypically, these were men. So almost no woman is depicted in the tombs, but we find them in the archaeology, so they were there. Yeah, so this is something we would like to continue in the future, this, the excavation and also the correlation of the different types of data locally, contextually in this community of Zawyet Sultan. Now the third part is a little bit more general, archaeology, visual culture, text. What are the problems and what is the potential for approaching commonness? And first we can have a look at a site that is close by. It's near Zawyet Sultan, slightly further to the south, a site that some of you may know very well. It's open to tourists because the rock tombs of the local governors here of the 12th dynasty, Middle Kingdom, a little bit later than Zawyet Sultan, are open to tourists. Some of the most beautiful tombs, decorated tombs in Egypt. Those are the tombs that you can see here, rock tombs. Between the larger tombs are smaller rock tombs, and then there is a whole range here of mastaba tombs with multiple shafts. So the situation is almost identical to Zawyet Sultan, rock tombs, several sizes of rock tombs, and multiple shaft mastabas. In Zawyet Sultan, we have better evidence also for the lower segment of the population, which is lacking here in Beni Hassan. Stefan Seidelmeier has conducted an analysis of the tomb decoration in the decorated tombs and the archaeology, so something that I've just tried for Zawyet Sultan. And this is a very interesting study with several conclusions. I just focus on a few things. So the first thing he found out is that the individuals depicted here in direct interaction with the local governor, this is the tomb owner of one of the big tombs, those people that were in direct contact here are the people that you find also mentioned on material, on objects in the multiple shaft mastabas. Which means that these multiple shaft mastabas belong to the upper segment of the local population, the population that were in direct contact with the governor, very different from other segments of the population, so-called scenes of daily life, so craftsmen are depicted here, again, very few women as always. And some of the supervisors in these images are still found in the tombs, in the multiple shaft tombs, but the rest of the population is lacking in the archaeology. So the visual imagery here reaches, socially speaking, deeper in the social hierarchy than the preserved archaeology at the site. This is where I think with our data in Zawyet Sultan, we have a great chance to complement this rather interesting study. Talking about visual culture, another interesting observation is to compare what happens in the Old Kingdom, not in the provincial hinterland, such as Zawyet Sultan, but what happens in the courtly cemeteries. And in the courtly cemeteries, the burial customs are radically different. Here we see one of the few well-preserved examples of an intact burial of the 4th or 5th dynasty, a courtly lady. She is not at all buried in the contracted position that we've seen in Zawyet Sultan. In Zawyet Sultan, all the individuals from this time period are in this fetal position, but this lady, here the concept is an entirely different one. She is dressed with a V-necked dress, as if she was a living person. She is buried not as a dead person, she's buried as a living person. It's a little bit similar to what many of us do today. So we would dress up. Well, we are many and we are diverse, but today I would say a majority is still buried in coffins, dressed up in whatever we believe is suitable. And the excavator of this tomb noted already a strong overlap of the dress with the dress that the same lady wears in the decoration of the tomb. So we really see how here in the courtly cemeteries, the deceased body was placed in an entirely new visual discourse. This kind of imagery we don't know from the low-ranking tombs in Zawyet Sultan. And it's not only that the courtiers and their wives are depicted on the walls, the idea of new image world extends into the burial chamber. And this is what we can see here. So the difference between the courtly milieu and the provincial milieu is significant. It diminishes towards the end of the Old Kingdom, but in this period, the early and high Old Kingdom, there are huge differences between these two different milieus. And of course also, statues emerge as a new class of objects. In this period, in the 4th dynasty, the royal statues are known from slightly earlier periods, but non-royal individuals, including of the royal family, they only start here in the 4th dynasty. No statue is found in Zawyet Sultan, and no statue is found for a long time in the Old Kingdom provincial cemeteries at all. This is something, we are so used to looking at statues, but it really is a very prestigious, restricted type of object. And of course, new image practices are structured around those statues. Here, for instance, is the famous example of the statue of Hemyunu today in the Hildesheim Museum. This was hidden in the serdab, so it was viewed by those that would visit the tomb. And all these visual practices structured around the statues are not existent in Zawyet Sultan. So I find interesting to exploit and explore the question of how visual the material culture in Zawyet Sultan was. Perhaps it was much more visual than we think, just the iconicity of the cemetery in Zawyet Sultan was a different one than the one that we see in the courtly cemeteries. Of course, talking about the potential of archaeological evidence for exploring the commoners, there have been quite a lot of studies of the human remains. As I mentioned before, here we see the South Tomb Cemetery from Amarna, the Nonalid cemetery of Amarna, one of the Nonalid cemeteries from Amarna. Here is the situation as the individuals were found. Very simple, again, subsurface burials. Some of them had superstructures, others didn't. And again, the bones exhibit quite a strong traumata from stress. And the anthropologists conclude that this might derive from these individuals having carried heavy stone blocks as those that we know from Amarna to build the new capital of Amarna, not very far away from Zawyet Sultan, by the way. So carrying these talatat blocks. Whether or not this is true, we can't say. But of course, the human remains are an important type of source to approach lived realities of the non-elite population. What they don't tell us is any questions of social organization and cultural orientation, whether anything that we call elite culture or high culture was relevant for these individuals, or whether they had different types of belief systems. It's very difficult to say. Barry Kemp also published this this age estimation of, how many is it, 260 something individuals, 232 individuals from this cemetery. And the bottom line here is most individuals died between 15 and 35. Those that survived childhood, so birth and childhood, so there is, as always, an underrepresentation of the youngest members of the community. We don't know where they were buried, but we believe that many of them died before the age of 6 months. So this is not entirely surprising. We are used to saying, life expectancy was something around 25 years or so in ancient Egypt. What does it mean for the individuals? So when would women have their first kids? When would you marry? That probably all happened at a very early age, maybe 13, maybe 14 or so. People probably knew they would die around, let's say, 25 or 30, so this was their expectancy, but they might have hoped to be 50 years old when they die, because some members in the community reach that age. So I find interesting, if we talk statistics and if we quantify society, it's not only about calculating the mean for a life expectancy. I find important to go back to an agent-based perspective, to go back to the ancient and ask how would they perceive their own lives given that they knew these realities. So I think there are new ways to approach statistics also when we talk about commoners. Other comments have been made again here by Barry Kemp on Amarna. We know this slide already. Barry Kemp has argued that Amarna wasn't really a city as we know it today, but rather it was a cluster of villages. So each of these larger domains was the residence of one patron, and this patron had a range of mid-ranking and low-ranking households assembled around him. This, according to Barry Kemp, would mirror the rural organization of Egyptian society. So in fact, Amarna would turn out to be a cluster of rural villages. Be that as it may, it's interesting again to ask ourselves, how was life for somebody living in this house here? We have learned already that the house might have had only a thin wall, so in the summer it would be very hot, in the winter fairly cold, and access to a well was communal. So the large estates, these estates here, they had their private well, here and here, so access to water was organized privately, but these individuals either had to go to their patrons or they used a communal well, such as here, for instance. So, I mean, these points have been made before, but I find interesting that via the material culture and via some intelligent thinking about what these maps of Amarna might mean, sheds light on the social organization of commoners. So they were organized communally, and falling out of social networks was probably a much bigger problem than being low-ranking. So having no support of a local community was more severe than being a commoner. Yeah, we see here again one image now of the suburbs of Amarna, these simple, very simple houses, rapidly built. Kate Spence conducted also an analysis of the comfort in these houses. They might have had, the inhabitants might have used the roofs, and they might also have built installations to let in cool wind to bring it down into the living room. Very clearly, it is not just the size of the houses that matters, but people accommodated their lives within those houses. If you want, they made the best out of the situation and tried to improve as much as they could. Of course, Amarna was given up very soon after the death of Akhenaten. We don't know exactly what would have happened to those houses if they had continued into the Ramesside period or beyond. My final example is, one of my pre-final, I think, example is the settlement of Elephantini. And here, to make it quick, I focus here on house 70, which has been studied in quite depth. And here, a similar story emerges from the archaeology. We can measure the house and we can understand how much privacy is in this house. Not a lot. There is one communal room here and there are two rare rooms. However, droppings from goats indicate that goats were kept in those rare rooms. As the excavator notes, perhaps this was also convenient for counting the stock of the goats. Or look also at these rings here, these circles. These are impressions in the ground of stands that might have held water basins. As the excavator speculates, these were probably used to cool down the room temperature in the summer. And because there was water in these, in the basins, in these zir jars, some of the water dripped down, and that's why the floor became a little bit humid, and the heavy jars, the stands on which the heavy jars were placed, sank into the ground, and this is why we see here now the impressions of these things. So interesting how we can approach comfort here again from the archaeological record. I jump over this slide here. Now, with natural sciences, we get a much clearer idea of the material culture and productivity in settlements. Cahoon, which many of you know, is one of the key examples, certainly, for talking about social structure. Some large houses, some very small houses. But we see that, again, people very soon after they moved in, they would bring down the walls. People would, again, accommodate their lives in this city, and central administration didn't have an interest in maintaining social order. The settlement was built like a table in 3D. The settlement was built. I need so and so many people, so and so many supervisors, so and so many mid-ranking, and so forth. But then once people moved in, they relaxed, so to speak, and tore down walls that didn't fit. And the material culture tells us a lot about the activities in the houses, including, for instance, here a plow, which points to agriculture as a major income for the settlement. Agriculture perhaps conducted around the settlement. Oh, I do have a few more slides. Let's jump here over the workman settlement in Giza. Just one comment. This is here close to the Giza pyramids construction site. Mark Lehner has recently published an article, and he again asked the question, how did it feel like to live in these galleries where workmen were presumably accommodated? This is what we call in archaeology phenomenology, so an investigation of smell and size and temperature. And again, he says, people transformed the very uncomfortable space into a slightly more comfortable space to make a slightly better living while they were recruited for work seasonally for the pyramids. And then Del Medina is now the last settlement that you know very well, the workman's settlement for the workmen of the tombs of the kings. This is the shortcut for the settlement, which has a more complex story. I quote it here because we have many, many hundreds of ostraca. And this one is an anecdote of a man who was thrown out by his wife twice. So, and he lists the household objects of the household, and he says at the end, and they threw me out again. They threw me out. My family threw me out of the house. I went again, and then they threw me out of the household. And probably then he made an appeal to the court, and this is why we have this ostrakon, because the man accuses his wife of not letting him into the house again. So we can approach also with textual material such as the ostraka, lived realities in, at least not in palaces and villas, but also in other households. So there is very rich evidence. All of this comes with potential and limitations. Settlement archaeology certainly is contributing a lot to our understanding of what common life might be. The problem with settlement archaeology is very often that we can say something about how life was organized, hygiene, well-being and comfort. Very rarely do we know who the people are. So we know that certain activities took place, storage, administration and what have you, but we don't know who the people were and how many of them. So this is a shortcoming in settlement archaeology. This is, of course, where administrative data such as the ostracan and papyri come in as useful. If we only had the ostraka without the settlement, we wouldn't have any idea how large the house is in which this man would have lived. So it's by combining the evidence, but it's not only about trying to assemble all the evidence and merge it in one picture, but it's rather to understand the logic of the various types of sources, the logic of visual display in the tomb decoration, the logic of the ostraka. Like the social pyramids that I've shown at the beginning, they show certain aspects of the reality, but never the entire reality. And in fact, I would say, is there any depiction that shows the entire reality? And that probably also belongs to the reflections. Does anybody of us have an idea of the entire reality? Think even of our own society. Is there any image, is there any text that would show the entirety, let's say, of the Italian society? I believe such thing doesn't exist. It also doesn't exist if you assemble all interviews and all statistical data from your government. And if you look at the house sizes and the tomb sizes and so forth, you can bring all this evidence together. Never ever will you have a complete integrated image of a reality. It's the multiplicity and the multivocality of the evidence that is really relevant. And I believe these are the kinds of things that we discuss in our breaks in the excavation if we don't test the latest fashion of Egyptian glasses. So we discuss these things. And it's this kind of multivocality that a very famous philosopher and let's call this philosopher and literary theorist has investigated with a famous paper from 1988, Can the Subaltern Speak? This is Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, an Indian-American scholar. The subaltern, these are the disempowered, the marginalized of the society, meaning the supposed 99% of ancient Egyptian society. Can they speak? Means, do they have a chance to offer any alternative worldviews to hegemonic views? Is it not the case, and this comes out of a post-colonial discussion, is it not the case for Chakravorty Spivak that the Indian population, as the colonized population, has to speak the language of the colonizers to make itself heard? We all know how deeply cultural concepts are embedded in the language. And if you have to use the language of the colonizer, as in the case of India, we understand how the subaltern, the colonized population, has to present itself with foreign concepts, with a foreign language, So they suddenly start to disappear also in scholarship. We simply believe there is no alternative to the hegemonic discourse. And these are the kinds of questions that I would like to investigate in the next 5 years in an ERC project, Subalternity in Early Egypt. This is not so much about colonized and colonizers, at least not in a period of culture contact, but rather here it's about centralized concepts, the courtly culture that we've seen, the lady, the nice lady that we've seen. This is the kind of hegemonic culture. And the non-elite in Zawyet Sultan, did they have a chance with their material culture to speak a different language than the courtly community that started to shape language, script, visual culture, and also the object culture in ancient Egypt. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Richard, for this fascinating and insightful presentation that gives us all lots of food for thought and was also like an exemplary way of applying also a research excavation to discuss these questions and not just like describe a tomb, but really use archaeological evidence, material culture evidence, textual evidence, iconographical evidence to get an understanding of those people and particularly in this case a local society and its individual constituents who make these societies and make them live and make them feel and make them think and make them believe and make them build and make them die and whatnot. Are there any kind of immediate questions here from the audience? Come? Sì, proverò a rifare il mio meglio di tradurre anche una domanda in italiano. Sì. Quindi lei? Ok. Qualcun altro? Qualcun'altra? Ok, qui, sì.
Now, I was just curious. In one of the slides, there was a picture of an arch, of a gallery with an arch. But from what period it was? Because we are taught that the arch is an Etrurian invention, like it was, at first it was from the Etrurian, but there are some kind of arches from Mycenaean period, but they are different. And from the image I didn't quite understood, so please. My question was just from what period, what is?
This is a reconstruction for a 4th dynasty settlement, meaning 2600 BC. And you would have to consult the architect why the arch has been used. We know that arches do appear for subterranean burial chambers. In house architecture, these domed structures appear in for instance, in the house of Elephantini, in the, how do you say this in English, cachettes. So each household had a hiding place where you could hide certain valuables, and they were built with a similar structure, but not as large as we've just seen. But that is certainly something for an engineer and for an archaeological architect to ask the question.
Further questions, curiosities?
It's just a curiosity. Which is the most important source of objects that can be found in Egypt? So it's in tombs or in residences and houses? Because I think it's also a different kind of information that you can gain. Because in houses it's let's say, real life of ancient Egyptians, while in tombs are more a representation of their life. So also maybe there was the thought of what we want to represent, how we want to represent our life in the future and for, let's say, the future life after death. So.
An excellent question, because this is one of the critique of investigation of daily life. Some scholars have argued that what you see in galleries in museums, very often you have a daily life gallery, and most of the objects come from tombs rather than from settlements. Now, daily life, dying is also daily life, but there is a different implication. I would entirely agree that this distinction hasn't been made clearly enough. The burial ground is a ritual place. Individuals are transformed into beings of a different order. We know this, of course, now from elite rituals, transformative spells that were recited during the burial. We assume that this also was done for non-elite individuals, but certainly they have entered a different realm, being not just deceased and spirits of the deceased, but they are ritually provisioned individuals. And that's also one of the arguments I'd like to make in my research project, that I believe what happened on the cemetery, including the cemetery of Zawyet Sultan, that the society of the living projected an imagined community on the cemetery. The cemetery is not just a mirror of social realities in the settlement. Unfortunately, we don't really know the settlement very well in Zawyet Sultan. But I believe that the society was reorganized for the burial ground. So it's a kind of idealized way of presenting the society. Even the hierarchies that I've shown might not have been as steep and strong as they appear on the burial ground. And maybe social relationships that are not expressed in the burial ground were very close between the nomad and somebody of lower rank or so. So that's why I would argue, too, we have to understand that cemeteries are not just settlements of the deceased. It's a different mode of representing the society.
Thank you. Other questions, curiosities? Also here in the Museo Egizio, there are the grave goods from the tomb of Ra, and it's the interesting thing, there are many objects properly made for the tomb, but many objects such as the beds and the little wooden boxes and all the household items are also things that properly were used in the household. So and there we see this kind of gap, or the use of these daily life objects in these kind of new contexts where they then get a complete new meaning and play different kind of roles, particularly in this change of identity of the deceased, in this case, Ra and married. So creating something like a mirrored daily life, but under complete different considerations, namely for these kind of funerary rituals. Other questions, other comments? I have a little one in regards to the amulets. The amulets that you showed all had a little loop at their back. So they were properly affixed to some kind of textile thing, or how do you imagine the amulets to work, since with the little necklace or the anklet bracelet with the beads, it's clear, but the amulets, how would they work in this adornment of a body? Where would you imagine them to be placed in a meaningful way?
We were very lucky to find the string of faience beads more or less in situ, close to the feet. Probably this is where it was originally strung. The amulets, unfortunately, came only out of the sieves, so the sieving. So we don't have a very clear understanding where they were originally found of this size. It was simply difficult in the excavation to establish where exactly on the body they were found. You are absolutely right. The position on the body is important. It makes a difference whether it was found on the breast as part of a necklace, or whether around the close to the hand or to the feet. But unfortunately, we couldn't document.
My last comment would be also, thank you again very much, Richard, for this amazing overview of your work, your research interests with a focus on Zawyet Sultan and all the other kind of food for thoughts, and going into the depth of also our own thinking about who we are, our identity, talking about death and life and all these kind of things. And I also think that we here in Turin, me as curator and also you as audience, we have learned a lot. And I think also when we tomorrow and the following days go through our galleries, we will also look at some of the objects on display with different eyes, because particularly Schiaparelli also with its excavations in provincial centers such as Zawyet Sultan, there is lots of material culture here that I very much found many links. And so also here we as Museo Egizio can learn a lot from Richard's research. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.